It's Monday, people are finishing work. A man walks out of a radio studio, he's done recording and heads for the car park. A few meters away, between the cars, someone is lying there, waiting for him. And then the shooting starts. 5 bullets, in the neck, in the back, and in the head. 6:06 in the evening, a call comes in to the police station in Hilversum. Shots at the media park. The man they shot at is Doctor Fortuyn, a politician. There are 9 days left until the election, and he is leading his own party and running from the top of the list. A little under 2 hours later, the main evening news bulletin opens with these words: "Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Doctor Fortuyn is dead." The man who shot him is a Dutchman. His name is Volker van der Graaf, and he has no criminal record at all. If anyone had checked his name in the police register that day, they would have found nothing on him. Since 1992, he has been active in an association dealing with environmental matters, and there he does one single thing: he writes papers. The association is not a party, it holds no demonstrations, it carries no banners. What it does is sue government offices, and what it's about specifically is fur farms. Animals are bred there so that their skin can be stripped of them and sold. The cages sit packed in rows inside the sheds, one beside the next. For a farm like that to get going, someone in a government office has to grant a permit, and when the office grants it, Van der Graaf appeals. For 10 years he did this professionally. He won roughly 3 cases out of 4, which means that in 3 cases out of 4, a farm that already had a piece of paper signed by an official in the end never actually got built. Let's add that his child had been born not long before. A few months earlier, Fortuyn gave an interview to the second largest paper in the country. That's where the line comes from that the Dutch still quote today: "I don't hate Islam, I consider it a backward culture." A year passed. On the 18th of July 2003, the court, having examined the case, announces why Van der Graaf committed this crime. He took the view the politician had to stop talking, and that silence had to be imposed on him. He claimed Fortuyn was a threat to asylum seekers and to people on benefits. He said the politician was deliberately making scapegoats of them to get into power. Before this, no politician had been killed in the Netherlands for 330 years, and 2.5 years after Pim's death, it happened again. The Netherlands, a country which in Europe passes for a model of tolerance. What on earth had to happen for it to come to this? It's the 25th of October, 1963. The plane has only just landed, and on board there are 56 passengers, all of them coming from Turkey. Waiting for them is an employee of the Ford factory in Amsterdam. They go straight to the plant. Someone picked these people and brought them over, sorted out their papers, bought their tickets. And that was done by a private company. In the Dutch State Archive there's a file of contracts the factory signed with these very workers. And let's pay attention to one single thing there: the date. The recruitment agreement between the Netherlands and Turkey is signed in August 1964. Yes, 10 months after these people had already flown in and were working there. Between 1964 and 1973, 225,000 people arrived in the Netherlands. The largest groups of them were the Turks and the Spaniards, around 65,000 people of each. August, the year 1964, Ankara. The buses pull up in front of a building. Some of them have driven 500 miles to get there. People get out and form a queue, and this whole selection takes 3 days. Not a few hours, but 3 whole days. The head of the personnel department walks along the queue, sent there to pick these men out in person. He writes down what they look like: unshaven, tired and pale, poorly dressed, little luggage. That is how a fragment of his official service note reads. And there are 2 doctors on the side as well. One is Turkish, the other German. They check the man's health and x-ray their lungs. A selection like this wasn't improvised. It's set out in the agreement between the 2 states, and the first thing you see there is that the economic aim isn't hidden. At the start it's written that the agreement is to encourage the hiring of Turkish and Moroccan workers in the Netherlands. The second thing, there is no mention there of worse conditions for them: equal pay with the Dutch workers, holiday and family allowance. In the agreement with Morocco, Article 18 says that the worker may bring his family over after 2 years. Housing for that family is found with help from the government and from the employer. 3 pages further on, the same document. And what happens when the work contract comes to an end? The worker is to leave the Netherlands. Let's take the Demka Steelworks. In the middle of the 60s, over 2,000 people work here. It isn't some mid-sized plant, it is a factory the size of a small town. The Poles came here 2 decades before the Turks, the steelworks needed hands non-stop, and people kept coming from new countries. Recruitment looked much like the one in Ankara. The company sends its own man, arranges the medicals and the transport. In the workers' own accounts, one advantage of that job comes up. It is steady. Over time they bought houses there and brought their families over. The year 1969. A harbor just outside Rotterdam. 2 ships are moored at the quay. One of them is called Rotterdam, the other one Ankara. These are what they call boarding ships. They don't sail because their role is different. Rotterdam and Ankara are moored by the glassworks. In the morning the men come off them and go to work, and in the evening they come back to sleep, and it all starts again. On the Rotterdam alone, about 140 people live, and these workers didn't choose that lodging in any way. The lodging is arranged by the employer, and in another town, a year later, an inspector walks into a boarding house, like this. On paper, the room he looks into is meant for 5 people. That's what the regulations say. The inspector starts counting the beds one by one. There are 12 of them in there, 12 men, 1 single toilet for all of them, and some of the rooms were so low that you couldn't even stand up straight in them. It's August 1972, the district down by the harbor. And one of the streets around here is called Good Hope Street, and living here, door to door, are the Rotterdammers whose grandfathers were born in these very same buildings, and then the men brought into work, no longer on a ship moored by the glassworks, but right here in rented out rooms. Because over those few years, one thing had changed. The employer no longer provides them with lodging. The boarding houses are now run by people who came here for the work themselves once. A Turk rents out a room and collects the rent, just like anyone else in this town. It all started with the rent. Mehmet runs one of those boarding houses and he rents out a room to a Dutch woman called Gerda. She stops paying him. In the Netherlands, an eviction is handled by a judge and a bailiff, but Mehmet doesn't go to court with it. He throws her out, and when Gerda comes back for her things, he pulls out a knife. The police arrive and explain to him that he can only go after his money in court. Mehmet leaves there furious. The police look around, they decide things are calm and they drive off again. Things were not calm at all, and the fight breaks out in the street, Turks and Dutchmen. One side goes at the other one. Mehmet pulls the knife again, only this time he uses it. Nobody dies, but there are injuries. The police come back, they detain the Turks, and then 500 people from the district gather outside the house. Voices come out of the crowd saying the Turkish landlord should be hanged. At night the stones fly, and not just at the one flat it all started over, because on that street the windows go in at the boarding houses and at a cafe called Ankara. Then someone throws a bottle of petrol and the crowd throws other people's furniture out of the rooms. This is no longer about Gerda and her rent, but about who rents out rooms in this district. Next day, someone takes a photo. 2 Turkish workers standing among the rubble. A smashed window, things all over the floor. The police now guard the Turkish houses. And a few days later, the people there start calling their own streets something else. One of them, they simply start calling the Dutch one. Nobody voted on it, the residents simply start making the point that this is their town. Cards appear in the windows, to let, Dutch only. On the 14th of August, 5 days after that fight, Dutch television turns up and makes a report. The journalist presenting the program, at the end, addresses the people of Rotterdam. More than one resident of Rotterdam ought to stand before a mirror and ask what he really sees in it. The Turk who takes their rubbish away has just formed a very different opinion of a country the residents are so happy to call hospitable. The city council brings in a cap, no more than 5% foreigners per district. If someone arrives where the threshold has already been hit, they're to look for a place somewhere else. For 2 years it's city law, and later the government strikes it down. All that time something else is going on that nobody in this district talks about. The Demka Steelworks, a symbol of steady work, around which the new arrivals had built their entire lives with their families. Already in 1966, the layoffs began there, and in 1983, the steelworks is shut down completely. As you can see, this didn't happen overnight, but the reason these people had been brought over here stopped existing, and they were still staying. They already had their houses, their mortgages, and their children in the local schools. And riots that started over the unpaid rent of a Dutch woman called Gerda. They were the first big ethnic riots in the post-war Netherlands. Did anyone in the Dutch government know that the worst of it was still ahead of them? Yes, they did, and they knew it well. On the 29th of September 1969, The Minister of Justice, Karel Polak, writes a letter to the Council of Ministers, and it is an internal document, a piece of paper that stays inside the house and never leaves it. Neither the voters nor the journalists will see it, so there's no need to come across well here. He's writing to people who hold exactly the same data he does. And one important note here: work permits were issued by the Social Affairs Ministry and residence permits by Justice. One office was putting these people into the factories and another answered for how long they stayed. And Polak writes from the second one. The letter stays, goes into the files, gets a number, and sits in the archive for the next half-century. The man writing it knows that perfectly well himself. That same year, by the glassworks, those two ships are moored. Dutch recruitment of new workers is at full steam at this very moment. It won't close for another 4 years, and the Justice Minister, Karel Polak, writes to the government this: foreigners arriving from all quarters, working in the lowest positions, together with their families, will form a new industrial proletariat, without sufficient ties to Dutch society. And further on, in the same letter, they will easily form a foreign body within our population, with all the consequences that brings. The Ministers for Social Affairs and the Economy wave those worries away. They don't reject what Karel Polak wrote, and it isn't that they disagree with him. They reject it because they have a different account on the table. The competitiveness of firms, which right now need people to work, what changed in state policy after that exchange? Nothing at all. Recruitment carries on. Justice could only write. It couldn't stop issuing the permits, because it wasn't the one issuing them. The warning was there in writing, with a date and with the minister's signature, and it still lost out to the economic account. 5 years after the minister's letter, the year 1974. The government lays a document before parliament saying what it will do. The government will not put obstacles in the way of foreign workers and their families who wish to give a stay intended as temporary a permanent character, and it will help them settle in. A decision taken a year after recruitment closed. That same year, that very same government sets up mother tongue teaching in the schools for the children of the workers who had been brought in, Turkish and Arabic, and they have it in normal lesson hours in a state school. Someone had to create those teaching posts, choose the textbooks, and add the subject to the timetable. And so we have here 2 documents. In the first, the new arrivals are staying for good and will help. In the second, we teach their children the language of the country they're going back to. And what about reality? Recruitment has been closed a year and people keep arriving by another route. The one in Article 18, which let a family be brought over after 2 years. Another 5 years pass. On the 9th of May 1979, a report reaches the Prime Minister. It was written by the Scientific Council for Government Policy, set up to advise the government. The report says 2 things at once. First, nobody ever consciously took the decision to accept these people permanently. Second, the consent happened anyway. Letting them in for a while turned out in practice to be a consent to permanent residence. Theirs, and very often their families too. The agreement let them in, but nowhere did it say that anyone at all was to stay there forever. A few pages further on, in that same report, a phrase appears which the council puts in quotation marks. It must be prevented that creeping immigration can continue on a large scale. That report comes 10 years after that letter from Karel Polak. The year 1996. The government lays before parliament a paper titled Limits to Tolerating, and it isn't about foreigners. In it, the government describes how the state can consciously not apply its own law, that it may decide this after weighing what matters more in a given case, and that an office may announce in advance that it won't punish a breach of a rule before anyone has even breached it. 2 years earlier, Parliament sets up a commission to account for those 33 years of minority policy. In 2004, the Commission delivers its report. A figure appears in it: 33 years of that policy cost the Netherlands over 16 billion euros. The Commission gave the exact result, and in a footnote, it added that nobody knows how much of that money was actually spent. That same year, the state stops funding the program. Mother tongue teaching drops out of the timetable, and priority now goes to learning Dutch. Before the same commission, the chairman of the Turkish consultative body testifies. The state itself set that body up so it would have someone to talk to about the Turkish minority and funded it itself. So the man testifying sits on the side of the table that all this money was going to. They ask him about those 16 billion, and he says where it really went. He uses a word which was an official term in the Netherlands back then, allochtoon, meaning someone with at least one of his parents born abroad. That is what the statistic office called them. If you really wanted to get rid of those allochtonen, you could just give them that money as a bonus for clearing out. And then he adds that the money went to organizations, institutions and studies where white people work. I'll stress that this is one witness speaking, not a finding of the commission. There's a line going around about that Netherlands that you may have heard, that they convicted people there for saying the country is full. The MP Hans Janmaat, for most of his career, 2 separate criminal cases ran against him. The first for what he said on the 24th of February, 1996 at a rally. Janmaat steps out in front of the crowd and says, "The moment we have the chance and the power, we will abolish the multicultural society." Multicultural society was the name of official policy in the Netherlands at the time. The crowd around him chants 3 slogans: "Full is full," "Our own people first," and "Holland for the Dutch." The court read his sentence in the light of those slogans. 2 provisions stand side by side in the file of that case. Article 137D of the Dutch Criminal Code, which is the ban on incitement to hatred, and the free speech provision from the International Covenant on Human Rights. The question was about where free speech ends and where incitement begins. And that one single statement cost Janmaat 7,500 guilders, which is about 3,500 euros, and a suspended sentence. All of this was the Fringe, a party that at its very best moment had 3 seats, and for most of its existence just 1, and whose vote nobody ever needed it for any majority at all. And yet the same thing was being said in this country by people from the center, from the floor of parliament, from the front pages of the biggest newspapers, and from the chairs where the leaders of the big parties sat. So what happened to them for it? To see that, you have to go back further than that rally. The 12th of September, 1991, one of the largest Dutch dailies publishes an article. Frits Bolkestein, leader of the Dutch Liberal Party, writes about Islam. The way women are treated in the world of Islam is a stain on the coat of arms of that civilization. Let me give you the context. This comes after a question about girls married off against their will, and about a Turkish theologian who praised the beating of women. One thing often disappears in the summaries. He doesn't say Islam. He talks about the way women are treated. And that's a charge about one specific thing, not a verdict on an entire religion. What happened to him in a country that passed for the most tolerant in Europe? The price came fast. The Prime Minister distances himself. He says outright this is not the government's position. What's it about? The charge is this. Bolkestein opened the door with what he said. People who want to talk about immigrants far worse will invoke him from tomorrow. Because if the leader of a big party says it, that means it's allowed. Notice that the charge isn't about whether it's true. Nobody tells Bolkestein that's false. Women in those countries are doing fine. The charge is about effects, about how others will use what he said, and there's no answering something like that with evidence. You can only assure people that wasn't the point or soften it. And the critics named outright exactly who they meant. They wrote that this piece of his is grist to the mill for Janmaat's party. The 21st of September, 1991, 9 days after that piece, Bolkestein stands before the council of his own party and softens what he said. 8 years later, almost the same sentence falls. Only this time it is said by a man that absolutely nobody expected it from. He had stood his whole life on exactly the opposite side of this argument. The essay for one of the biggest dailies is written by Paul Scheffer, a commentator from the Social Democratic camp. And the Social Democrats in the Netherlands are the side that for 30 years defended multicultural policy in the chamber, explained it in public and wrote the programs for it. Scheffer is from exactly that camp. When a charge like that comes from the other side, there's a ready answer. That's the other side talking, and the other side always talks like that. The charge can be set aside without reading, because you know who made it. But this time, it's made by someone from your own camp. In a situation like that, you can't walk past. What's left is either admitting there's something in it, or treating one of your own as an enemy. Integration with the preservation of one's own identity is a pious lie which the state should not, as it does today, support. That sentence has 3 parts. The first, integration with the preservation of one's own identity. That's the name of the line the state had run since the 70s and written into its documents. That the newcomer is to find his place in the Netherlands and at the same time keep what he came with, and the state will help him in that. And the second, a pious lie. meaning the kind of lie you tell in good faith, most often while deceiving yourself. People kept repeating a sentence they wanted to believe in because it sounded decent and it let them avoid making any decision at all. And the third part, the point that the state ought to change its course. Without that, we'd be left with a cultural diagnosis, that people from different worlds can't live side by side, and that somebody was deluding himself. But taken whole, it's already a serious charge against what the state is doing with the taxpayers' money. And it isn't a blow at the newcomers, but at the people who thought this up and who funded it. The parliamentary group leaders, the people who negotiate the coalition, divide up the budget and decide, start debating a newspaper article. That debate later got a name of its very own. People now call it the Schäfer debate. 4 years later, an MP from the governing party begins her speech not with the report, but with something that happened on television. This past Sunday, one of the biggest critics of the multicultural society capitulated live on television. Paul Clitter, philosopher and columnist, announced he is giving up writing columns. He didn't say why, and 2 sentences on, in the same speech, the messenger is punished, people in districts like Amsterdam West or Rotterdam Charleroi are once again threatened with being gagged. In that same debate, an MP from the Liberal Party takes the floor, the same party Bolkestein led 13 years earlier. And she attacks the institute. She says the commission gave the research to an outside institute and 80% of the budget went on it. And that this institute raises some doubts for her. Another MP answers that she hasn't pointed to a single factual error in that report, and all of this is happening in parliament, among people who state their views from the floor. But there were also people in this country who preferred an opponent to fall silent forever. We're back at the car park we started from. The plan for the crime was made on the 5th of May, and it was set to be carried out the next day. Less than a full day passes between the one and the other. Van der Graaf lived in what they call a decent district, and he wasn't the type of man who got himself into fights, and he didn't go blocking roads with banners. He filed applications and waited weeks for the office to answer. When his appeal went through, the farm didn't open. Before any of this happened, he said about himself, "I don't have to be an animal lover to protect animals." The second statement came after it was all over. "I saw in the victim a danger to society. I saw no other possibility for myself than what I did. The trial is underway." The court establishes whether what the accused gave as his motive fits with the rest of the evidence. The first instance verdict, 18 years. The appeal examines the case once again, but the sentence still stands. The appeal court in Amsterdam describes the motive like this. He was of the opinion that silence had to be imposed on him, on Doctor Fortuyn. In the original, there's a verb there that means to impose, the way a sentence is imposed on someone. 2.5 years later, Amsterdam, the eastern part of the city. Theo van Gogh, a Dutch filmmaker, is riding his bike. An ordinary day. Theo is shot dead, and then the killer pins a letter to his body with a knife, so that everyone who walks up to him will see it. A few months earlier, Theo had made a 10-minute film about the violence against women in Islam. The script was written for him by that MP, the very same one who questioned the institute's credibility. And this letter of his is addressed exactly to her, to that very woman. No discussions, no demonstrations, no marches, no petitions. Only that will separate truth from falsehood. This letter is an attempt to impose silence on your evil once and for all. It's the same way Van der Graaf spoke about his motive, to impose the silence as a punishment. That very same day, 2 ministers, Justice and the Interior, write to the parliament, and to the letter they attach an appendix to it, the note taken off the body. The government's first reflex is to send the killer's text and its own description of him. It is further disturbing that the suspect, born and raised in the Netherlands, underwent here a process of radicalization that led him to this unimaginable act. The killer was born in Amsterdam. It was his parents who came over from Morocco, and this is exactly the mechanism that is so easy to miss. The state brings people into work for a short while, then no decision gets taken, and 20 years on, it turns out these people are still in the country. Let's start with the question that looks simplest. How many people does the Netherlands bring in to work today? The Statistics Office answered that in June this year. The answer to the question of how many migrant workers there are in the Netherlands is not unambiguous. Then the office gives 7 different figures. Each counts somebody else. The lowest of them is 400,000 and the highest one 1,600,000. A country that has 18 million inhabitants doesn't actually know who it is supposed to be counting. Less than a year earlier, the Dutch Safety Board wrote that at least 200,000 migrant workers are in a weak position. And they explained that phrase like this: many of these people are dependent on their employer. It's down to him whether they have housing and access to a doctor. The board also states that this group has accidents at work 1.4 to 5 times more often than the Dutch average. A government commission noticed it in the year 2020. It recommended separating the tenancy agreement from the work contract, on paper and in practice. Somebody wrote that sentence deliberately. The author of it foresaw what would happen if it were carried out only halfway. And guess what came next? On the 1st of July 2023, the Letting Act comes into force. In one of its provisions, there is a line saying that the tenancy agreement is to be drawn up separately from the work contract. From that day on, they have to be two entirely separate documents, and the Act doesn't say at all that the landlord can't be the employer. And it doesn't say that losing your job can't mean losing your home as well. In practice, it means that from that moment on, there are simply two quite separate pieces of paper. And the question suggests itself here: if the housing contract is a separate one, then why doesn't this man simply rent himself a flat somewhere else? He can do that. Nobody is stopping him. Only in order to rent a flat in the Netherlands from anybody else, you have to show an income of 3 times the rent, an open-ended work contract, and a history of your previous tenancies. You also have to get through an interview in Dutch, and council housing has a waiting list that is counted in years from the day you sign up for it. A man who came over for 8 months through an employment agency meets none of those conditions, so he was given a right that he can't actually use. And now, the second thing. In the Netherlands, as a rule, an employer may deduct nothing at all from the minimum wage. There are 2 exceptions here: health insurance and housing, up to a quarter of the minimum wage. In February 2025, the government announces that it is going to gradually drop that cap. 8 months later, it backs out of it. And what is the reason? Giving up the option of deducting housing from the minimum wage would at this moment have more negative than positive effects for the migrant worker. And it sounds like a protection against an employer who would ask half a salary just for a bed. And that's exactly what it was meant to be. Only that provision doesn't say what the lodging may cost. It says how much may be taken out of the pay, and a worker like that has no real alternative. The oversight of all this is only now being built. In November 2025, Parliament passed a law requiring employment agencies to obtain a license. And the first fines for the agencies that operate without one come in from January 2028. The very first ships with workers docked in the Dutch ports back in the 60s. And the control over who brings these people in still doesn't work to this day. And that child, who back in 74 was taught in a Dutch school the language of the country he was supposed to be going back to, today has children born in the Netherlands, and grandchildren who in the tables of the statistics office appear there simply as Dutch. And in their very place, this country today brings in the next ones, also just for a while. Take care of yourselves and see you soon.
Noc. Strażnik w jednym z największych szwajcarskich banków przechodzi obok niszczarki.
He looks at what's going into it and decides to carry those papers out. He doesn't yet know that with that one decision, he has just destroyed his own life. Click the thumbnail and see how the Swiss banking scam works. This is called Lemon. Thanks for watching.